Buckle up. Welcome to Musicians of Beyond special multi-part series Under the Covers with Ernie Cefalu. Your hosts John Sarabian and Mark Lawhorn are going to expose the history-making journey of this iconic figure and his contributions to the music and corporate world. Today we're going to talk to Ernie about all his freelance work and when he goes to New York to do all his corporate work with Scholastic Books, The Garden of Eden, Jazz on Grass, New York Life, and so much more. You're guaranteed to enjoy this episode, and please remember to share it with your friends. Okay, cool. So
I'm pretty buttoned up, man. For somebody that's really out of it, I'm pretty buttoned up.
You clean up well, Ernie. You clean up well.
I just, again, I appreciate this and got a lot of traction from the Goldmine magazine still. I mean, it's been pretty crazy. And, and I hope you guys are seeing a spike in your, people looking at your show and stuff. And I'm going to promote it even more. Yeah. It's just been really kind of crazy with this. And then there's a movie that's come along that this woman who financed the movie, who's very rich and hangs out with Eric Clapton and all this stuff, and her partner, who is a producer, director, writer, have a film that they are talking to us about doing the key art for. And I used to do movie posters for a little while. It's like, be careful what you wish for because you just might get it. And that was what it was, because being used to doing album covers and being able to go into a record store and seeing your stuff there on the shelf, you didn't get that same kind of satisfaction with corporate America. Corporate America was like throwing a bucket of water in the ocean, and maybe you see somewhere down the line a piece of something you did or contributed to. So, it was got kind of spoiled doing album covers. And when we stopped doing that in the 80s pretty much and got into corporate America, I really missed it. I really missed that, being able to see it right there. And I thought, well, another way to do that is movie posters. And a lot of the guys that work for me, Drew Struzan, Bill Garland, Joe Garnett, all of them went off and started working, Carl Ramsey, for movie poster companies. And like Seiniger was the biggest one. Stole Drew, stole Bill, stole 3 or 4 people from me, and even talks about it in The Man Behind the Poster. There's a movie called Man Behind the Poster. It's a documentary on Drew Struzan. And they got Tony Seiniger talking about how he wanted to get a hold of Drew Struzan. So he called Pacific Pioneer and we put him he got on the phone and he hired him away from us.
Well, at least he was honest about it, right? That he still...
Yeah. Oh yeah. No. And you know what? I understand. I mean, what we paid them in a week, they could make in a day doing sketches and stuff for movie posters. And I thought, well, shit, I could do movie posters. So I got into that. I worked for a company that just did movie posters. And I'll tell you what, man, it was like jumping naked into a meat grinder. Okay. And it was awful. It was one of the worst experiences I've ever had in my career. And I did it for, 7 months, and then just said, no, I can't do this anymore.
So let me ask you, just curious, what would make Drew stick with it and deal with the shit that came along with it?
That's an easy one to answer. Money.
Money. Yeah.
Yeah, because when he was feeling like you're feeling, okay, and they come to you and say, okay, Mark, we need this poster, okay? We're on a deadline. You've agreed to do it. You're not feeling well. How about if we give you another 10 grand, okay? Well, I'm really hurt. I'll tell you what, we'll give you 20 grand. And it just went up and exponentially just boom, 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 because they have all the money in the world.
Right.
They spent $30 million on a movie. What do you think they spent? If they spent $200,000 or $300,000 on a poster, that's nothing.
Right.
Yeah. So that's pennies.
Isn't that
and
something?
they use that for everything. They use it for all the advertising, all the promotion, everything. And that's what the situation I'm in with this pharmaceutical company, because I could create the key art for their movie and then they move on without me. And a part of it's paranoia, part of it's past history where you've had it done before. And, you just got to, convince yourself that you shouldn't be paranoid. I had a long talk with Bob Englesleep, and the guy that does all my finishing for me on the computer. And, he just said, man, there's no way you can guarantee. There's no guarantee. All you can do is do the best you can do. And hopefully they'll be receptive enough and understand what you've done, the value you brought, and want to keep on doing it. And I have clients like that. I have clients that I've been working for 20 years. Very few. I got rid of a lot of them because I just didn't want to work with them anymore. But, that's really kind of what it's all about, and so we'll see where it goes. I mean, it's like the Rolling Stones stuff. I did the original one and then so many other ones have been done, and given credit, and it's okay because it just to be part of it, to be, like I always say, the chicken or the egg, because that's what it was in the beginning, me and Pichet. They used both of them at the same time, so I don't care whether he was first or I was first. It doesn't matter. It's all part of being part of something much bigger than
bigger
yourself.
Picture. Yeah.
Your whole story is incredible. I mean, the freelance work is a big part of it.
Yeah.
You started with the freelance work, you went into the album covers, you're still doing the album covers, and you're still back with the freelance work. But everything is based and started back when you did the freelance work.
Yeah. And, it's funny because it didn't start in the music business. I was just a music fan. I was the biggest fan, hanging out in front of the Jefferson Airplane House down in the Haight-Ashbury. I mean, that was something. And then 3 years later, I'm working with him. It was like a dream come true, like being the ultimate fan and being able to not only meet them, but help create their image. And I never realized that what I was doing was creating branding for these guys. The Bee Gees, the Rolling Stones, Alice Cooper, they still use those logos to this day. So that was a brand that I created when I didn't even know what a brand was.
Right.
I just knew that this group needed something more than set type. It needed, in those days, there wasn't a lot of hand lettering. I mean, because it was mainly type, and then it went to phototype where you could do a bit more than set fonts and stuff that were already existing. And then it because of necessity, because for me, it was the album cover business, because each band needed to have its own identity, its own presence, its own, look and feel that it became known for. And that was the way I approached it, whether it was Earth, Wind and Fire or Alice Cooper or the Bee Gees or the Rolling Stones. It was something that kind of reflected them and who they were. And then a lot of them were smart enough to keep using it. Bloodstone, Foghat, it goes on and on. There's the main ones, and then there's all these secondary and tertiary groups that I created branding for, like Sarah. I don't know whether you've ever heard of Sarah, the group. It was a one-hit
wonder. You and I had chatted about this.
Yeah. And that logo probably is the most beautiful logo I've ever created. It's a real Art Nouveau, beautiful lettering, with this Art Nouveau woman in there. And it was just amazing. They had one album, but that logo, you look at it today and it's just as beautiful today as it was then.
Yeah, it's timeless. It's timeless.
And that's the other thing that I tried to do. I didn't really follow trends, and I didn't follow fads, although the Peter Max was a big influence on me. And you can see from this poster behind me, that Jazz on Grass poster that we sort of touched on last time, that was a pretty heavy concert. And I had just been in New York for probably less than a year. And here's the funny part. Remember I told you about the Jelly Roll Press?
Yes.
And how they were and they were supplying everybody with everything, including the Black Panthers. They were in there. I guess they would be like Antifa today, but not as violent. They were an organization that formed when they needed to be formed, wherever it was, and they found people with like mindset that would be in it. Okay, so we're in New York, and Kenny Flint, who you see in the picture behind me where Bonnie and I are getting married over here, that's Kenny Flint with the dark glasses. He was the copywriter that I had talked about, that we met at an agency. We became good friends. And he had a friend, and Kenny was kind of like a rebel, okay? But he was a great copywriter. But he'd call it the way it was. And he was a real New Yorker. And we hit it off great. And he had this friend named Ivan Cronenfeld, okay? And he said, you got to meet Ivan. You got to meet Ivan. And, Ivan's doing this thing. He's working through the Staten Island Community College. But a lot of that is a front to help these other organizations fund these other events and stuff that they were doing. So he brings Ivan over to the house. And guess what? He knows the guys from the Jelly Roll Press. They're all part of, it's like, I just saw this thing on Antifa, and not that I agree with anything they're doing, but they're talking about how they're a militia that forms whenever it needs to be formed, wherever it needs to be protested against, and they're paid and they're funded. And that was nothing new. These guys were doing it back in the late 60s and 70s, and a lot of it stemmed from Vietnam. a lot of the, people that protest, I mean, I was there in college from 1964 to 1969 in Oakland, and right just a mile from the Berkeley campus where it was all going on. And, and so it turns out that he knows these guys. And it was like we were brothers, and
Right.
So he said, well, I've got this thing, this concert, and he was connected heavily with, I don't know what you call it other than the underground, I mean, nothing violent, no guns or anything, but it was more of, his attitude was you can fight it from the outside and really get a lot of resistance, or you can go into the inside and fight it from the inside, because that's really where you can make change. That's where they're not expecting. And so he was a firm believer in that. He was into peaceful kind of protests and stuff. And he was involved with, he used the Staten Island Community College umbrella to sort of do all the stuff that he was doing. And he said, I've got this whole thing and we're raising money. This concert is going to be raising money for people in poverty and in low income areas, food banks and stuff like that. He was doing that back in the 60s and 70s. And I never realized, how much he was involved. I had this friend once that he was kind of a bookie. He would take bets and stuff, but he was also a made guy. I never knew it. When I found out he was a made guy, I was like, Bonnie and I never went over there anymore. We became friends with him and his wife, but it's like, oh man, you can't be associating with that kind of stuff. So Ivan was kind of like that, but on the good side, he was like Robin Hood. Right. He would take from the rich and give to the poor. And that was his whole attitude, and so he got me involved in this jazz on grass.
So Ernie, there were so many great artists out there. Did you have one artist that was very influential for you?
Talking about being influenced, Peter Max was a huge influence on me. A lot of people say, oh, that's really lame because Peter Max was one of the icons of my generation. The stuff that he created was amazing. And already being a symmetrical kind of designer, balance and symmetry and stuff was very important to me. I gravitated toward Peter Max and a lot of the early stuff, including Jesus Christ Superstar. It's symmetrical. I do a lot of symmetrical design because it's comfortable, it's safe, and I don't follow trends and I don't follow, fads. When you start doing that, you really sort of pigeonhole yourself. And that's one of the reasons why I always kept a foot in both corporate and music. So I did this poster. And I mean, there was some pretty amazing, Pharoah Sanders, Leon Thomas, Eddie Cale, Freddie Hubbard, Carmen McRae, major jazz acts at this concert. It was an amazing concert. It went off really well. And, I did this poster for them, and it was just really great to be involved with them. And it was around the same time that this is like summer of 1970. Wow. And we had been there probably close to a year and made some friends and with Kenny and his wife, Sheila, and another couple that we became friends with. And when Bonnie and I got married, we only knew Kenny and his wife and their friends, Ronnie and Debbie. And we wanted to get married, and we didn't tell our parents, but she came to New York to live with me finally when I got my first job. And so we decided we were going to get married. And they said, well, you got to get married in Yonkers. Got to go to Yonkers and get married by a justice of the peace. Well, I didn't know. I mean, sure. Okay. So that's where we got married. And it was amazing because we had been together for 6 years. We were like already married. I don't know. I know her parents were 110%. My mother, I told you, when I first brought Bonnie home, she excused herself and went into the kitchen and tried to overdose on raviolis. We had to pump her stomach and she'd call the paramedics. And because Bonnie was blonde, she wasn't a Catholic. Okay. She wasn't Italian.
Yeah, she didn't fit the mold.
Oh man, yeah, it was like, you could come home with, the worst hooker you'd ever find, and she'd be more welcome at that moment. As long as she was Italian, Christian, it was very funny. But in those days, my mother tried to set me up with Italian girls. They belonged to this Italian club where everybody, would get together at picnics and stuff, and they would get together with friends that had children, and they were constantly trying to set me up with these Italian girls, and all my cousins married Italian girls. There was a bunch of us. They all married Italian. I was the only one that married a girl that wasn't Catholic and wasn't Italian. But my mother, never forget, my mother set me up with a second cousin's daughter. Her last name was Cefalu as well. And she was kind of nice. Her name was Mary. They're all named Mary, or Joseph. But she had, the problem was that I wasn't attracted to that kind of a woman, Italian, dark hair. But she had this mole right in the middle of her, between her eyes. And I swear to God, guys, you just can't take your eyes off that. You just can't ignore that.
There are some things you just can't unsee.
Yeah. I had a client once, the head of marketing was in the meeting. He had a zit on the end of his nose and it was festered. And that's all you could look at. Had another client, NGK Spark Plugs. His name was Dan, and he wore a toupee. And sometimes he'd come to the meetings, and the toupee would be slightly off, and and you couldn't help but, and you can't say nothing, you just can't say nothing. So you grin and bear it. But Bonnie was, but the beautiful thing was that my mom, after we pumped her stomach and she came around, she really loved Bonnie like the daughter she never had. Excellent. And all my cousins, every one of them that married Italian girls, ended up in divorces. My brother had 3 divorces. We've been together 57 years now, and so it's that magical thing that I've been very blessed my whole career.
57 years married is a hell of a long time, Ernie. Where'd you go after the Jazz on Grass? What was your next step?
So, going from Jazz on Grass, I had gotten my first job and at Carloni, and we were working on all the Dolls Alive stuff. And in the interim of getting that first gig, I made a lot of sales. I made a lot of calls trying to get a job. I told you when I was in college in LA or in Oakland, I would try and call agencies in New York and make appointments. I knew I would be there in June, so I'd try and make appointments for July and on. And I was able to do a few of them. And then I would make cold calls, from New York when I was there. And so I was running out of the leads that I had set up. And one of them was Scholastic Book. And when we were all kids, you got the thing every month and you could order your books from it and stuff. And so I was familiar with the brand because I had actually ordered books when I was in junior high school and elementary school. And so there was this guy named Nick Scalise. And I'll never forget that name because it was Nick Scalise at Scholastic Book. And it was just like one of these things that you never forgot. So when I called on him, he really loved my work, but he wasn't in a hiring position at that point. And we became friends. We would talk on the phone. Once in a while, we'd get together for lunch. And I got my first job and let him know. And one day I get a call from him. And he said, I have an opportunity here to get you involved as a designer on some of these covers for Scholastic Book that go out to the different schools and stuff. So I came in and he gave me 2 or 3 to do. And at that point we were using, it was one of their logos. It was really pretty lame. It was from like the 40s and it really needed to be updated. So he hired me to do a new logo for them. And I did the one that you see up here, which is the book club. We created.
I remember that logo.
Yeah. So, I did that, and I mean, it wasn't a real barnstorm breaker, but it was work. And it was work that was different than what I was doing at the agency. So I was really happy. I was able to, always have that other project that wasn't like the one I was working on. Diversity, it's the variety is the spice of life. It's also the fuel for creativity. When you get stuck doing the same thing. I had a friend in New York that I had made a friend with. He was a designer and he was designing catalogs. And he got me a freelance job there at one point. And it was like after the first day or two, you just want to go home and shoot yourself because it's terrible, doing catalogs. And it was just awful. And it's another one of those things that I never, ever wanted to do. And I was able to not do it. And what you see over here on the other end is a picture of my mom and dad on their wedding day in the late 30s. They got married. And then, and that's what I said, 3 brothers married 3 sisters from 2 different Italian families, which was, what they did in those days, And so, but then after the war, it's funny because all the Italians married Irish. And the Irish always hated the Italians. The Irish were cops, and the Italians were crooks, and that's kind of how it always was, So, but after the war, a lot of things changed. In 1945, people came back from that war and had a different kind of goal and a different kind of look at life and freedom and everything that this country had to offer. And like I said, my dad had moved the family from Florida to California to San Jose because tract homes were being built left and right. I mean, it was all these vets were coming home. They needed places to stay. So they were building all these tract homes, and so my uncle lured us back out to California for the first time. And it was great. I mean, the rest of it was really kind of neat to be able to, grow up in San Jose. It was a great place to grow up. And then college in Oakland, was really something. And then going to New York, that was kind of like a scary thing, but like I mentioned before, I never really looked at it like I was afraid. There was really no fear, except when I couldn't get a job. After almost 2 weeks, I couldn't get a job, and it was like something's wrong here because I checked all my charts and everything said that I should be a success by now. They should be fighting for me, and they didn't. And I really didn't understand why till later. And that I was so green. And even though I had some printed professional pieces in my portfolio, there was still a lot of college work. Yep. And asking the money I was asking, I didn't know what to ask. I didn't have anybody to ask. What do you think I should do? And Kenny, like I said, Kenny really sort of helped me along with being a good friend. And he and his wife and that other couple, Bill and Terry, became really support system for us because they all grew up in New York. They were at home, they were very comfortable there, and we were kind of like fish out of water, and it can be very scary.
Of course it can. I mean, you took a gamble. You took a gamble picking up, moving your family, going to New York, and you went there for, corporate work. And it sounds like you hit it off pretty quick by doing the Jazz on Grass, which was a huge deal.
Yeah,
and then,
it was.
Scholastic Books they're still in business today, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
So
and I've done a few covers. I think 4 or 5 different covers. I was going to pull some of them out, but they're up in inventory, and it got to be crazy. I got hit with a lot of work that I had to do with these new clients, 2 new clients that came along, but at some point, I'll have them. I need to shoot them for the book, and there's so many different things to talk about, and it's kind of like trying to find, in the work. That's just a small little tip of some of the stuff that I was doing in corporate America as well. I was working for, in the agency that I went to work for, after Carloni, it was Norman Levitt, and I was doing work for, ITT Levitt Palm Coast, wearing blenders and mixers. I think that's what you see, wearing blenders and mixers back there. And you also see, let's see, there's wearing blenders and mixers, and there's what else?
Omega watches.
Omega watches, yeah, but there's another image back there, and I forget what it is. But yeah, I was doing all this other corporate work. New York Life Insurance. We were in the New York Life building, and they had New York Life as a client. So I would be working on that client, working, and then Decca Records came along, that got me the job in the first place with the Jesus Christ Superstar album. We'll be talking about that on the next show. But, the corporate work was always the way in until the music business happened, and then it became the lead horse because there was a lot of it. I love doing it. I already love music. I can't carry a tune in a bucket, but I always love music. And so, and in the 60s, the music was changing, it was, moving to the West Coast. It was coming from the West Coast, and I was on the West Coast, and, right next to a lot of these, San Francisco was where a lot of them were, and the Haight-Ashbury and the whole peace movement, I was very much aware of all that. And music played a big part of that. Music was a big part of that. It was the common denominator that put everybody together, which is something we don't have today.
Right.
Music is all over the place.
Well, you made me think about something when you said music was changing, the world was changing, and you were changing from the corporate work going into the musical industry. When Was there a time where you were proposing stuff in the corporate world where it just seemed too risque to your bosses, to you? You're a risk taker. So at that time, was there ever any work that you were doing that they said, oh, wait a minute, that's a little bit too edgy for us, made you start thinking, oh, I got to go in a different direction? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I would always do that. I would always, whether it was a music thing or it was a corporate thing, I would always do a variety of things because ideas, I never had a shortage of ideas. So some of them would push the envelope a bit more, a little more disruptive than the safe ones because I knew what they'd buy. Agencies sell clients what they know they'll buy, not necessarily what they need. Okay. Because if I try and sell you something that I have to convince you of, that you're going to question and you're not going to feel comfortable at first, that's a big thing that I have to do. Why not just give you what you're going to be happy with?
Right.
And they know what you're going to be happy with. So just sell them what they want. And I was constantly going against that because I would say, that's like shooting ducks in a barrel. Let's give them something that will differentiate them from their competitor. And that was, for me, differentiation is a big part of it, because you got so many people selling life insurance, so many people selling this and that. How do you make it different? Be different so that you stand out, and that was always the way I would approach it. And sometimes, and this never failed as well, you always give them one that's a piece of poo. Okay, it's poo-poo. Okay, you sort of put it in the deck so you fill it out, but it's poo. And I've had that backfire where they go for the poo. They want the poo. And then you got to make the poo better. But wait a minute. No, you're losing it. We want the poo. You're now trying to change the poo. We want the poo. And I'll tell you, I did that a few times and it backfired on me a couple of times and I stopped doing that. It was like using a title for myself as a change agent. That maybe 10, 15 years ago, change agent was really popular. It was the cool thing. But what you found out is people don't want change. People in business don't want change. They want it to be copacetic. They want to feel comfortable going to work and not being challenged. They want to do their job and go home and think about what they really want to do. Okay. Change means things are going to change. And that could mean you're gone. And a lot of times that would mean you're gone. So change wasn't really that embraced. So trying to stay away from the poo and giving them stuff that was not that far off, but always a one that would really push the envelope, what they call out of the box thinking. Most of them, you take them out of the box and they get really afraid and run back in. I want to see something different. I want to see something unique. You show it to them, it scares the hell out of them.
Right. So, Ernie, when you did the corporate work, where and when did you come up with the ideas? Would you sit at your desk and try to conjure up something, or would you be driving down the street and say, shit, this is a good idea for that, or a combination of everything? Like, where did you...
I think it's a combination of all those things. I mean, I found that driving in the car is really good because it frees you from everything else and you're focusing on driving. And then things just come. It's weird. I don't know how to explain it. They just come, and like this client that I was talking to you earlier about, it took me less than 2 hours to come up with a half a dozen names that are killer, and that you can use because there's certain things that you can't say. You can't make claims. Okay. So if it's something that's going to put enamel on your teeth, you can't say that unless it's FDA approved and all this stuff. And so you got to be very, very careful. The marijuana business is like that. The CBD business is like that. Everything has to be checked, labels, city and state codes, all that has to be on there and inspected. So, you really kind of, you kind of have to come up with a way of doing something that captures all that without doing it. It's like saying it without saying it. I'm going to say this and this, and you're going to connect the dots. That's kind of usually where I go with something like this. And less than 2 hours, I nailed it. I mean, I'm not going to tell them that, but I nailed it.
Well, when they listen to this, they're going to hear it, Ernie.
Yeah. Well, that's okay, but they don't know who I'm talking about. They don't know who I'm talking about. And I'm not talking about you guys, I swear to God. It's a different client. It's a different client. Fishing business. Yeah. No, it's funny how as you get older, I mean, at least for me, I mean, I think we talked about this before. The ideas when I was young were hard coming because I really didn't have a library to draw from. I didn't have boxes of sketches that were never used. I didn't have, and I haven't looked at those in years, but they're there. They're like my safety net. I call it my golden parachute because I never was in corporate America. I never had the opportunity to get any kind of parachute. So usually going down the toilet, but you know, I have my boxes that are my golden parachute if I ever need an idea and can't put one together.
Right. So you have a cache of ideas that if you can't come up with something, you might pull something from 20, 30 years ago and say, Jesus, this will fit perfect.
Oh, absolutely. Because those ideas are all ideas. Every idea is a great one.
Yeah.
Okay. Every idea is a great one. Some are a little less great than others, but they're all good. And even the ones that aren't great, you can make them great because then you can take that idea and apply it to another situation and it just works. I mean, and you know, funny, I've never had to do that. I've got those boxes. I've never had to go to them yet. Thank God, not yet. Maybe when I'm pooping in my pants and I can't put two thoughts together, I'll need to go to them or have somebody that's taking care of me go to them and show them in front of me, you know, and I'll nod if I still can move my head.
Blink twice for yes and once for no.
Yeah, blink twice if it's yes, once for no, and three for maybe.
And do you document most of your ideas? Like anytime you come up with something, do you pretty much put it down and say this might be good for something in the future? Or
yeah. Well, no, what I do is it's funny because I'll work on a project and I'll do all these different things. I'll do something and that looks good, and I'll go over here and do this, and I'll try that and do this, and take this piece of this and put it with a piece of that, and now you got something else. So and then the ones that I narrow it down to, the other ones, those rough sketches go into a pile, and then the pile gets bigger as I refine the thing, and then it all goes into a box, you know, and you know, all those ideas are still there. They're in rough form, and probably I'd be the only one to figure out what the hell it looks like, and what it was supposed to be. But it's really funny because and we talked about this before, there's only so many problems, you know, really, when you think about it, there's only so many problems in what I do, you know, and so it isn't like anybody can come to me like this client that we were talking about. I have already done stuff in that industry, you know, already done stuff in 2 or 3 different kinds of that industry. So, and you'd be hard pressed. You would really be hard pressed to name an industry that I haven't done something in because of just that wanting to be diverse and really kind of not get pigeonholed. And the biggest fear I've always had is to get known as the guy that did this or the guy that does that, because it's much more than that. You know, the creative process is much more than that. And if you're a creative, you should be able to handle any situation, any project, any category. You know, I used to do stuff like when I was doing work for Kmart, and I would go into a store and I would go through aisles where the product that I was working on would be. I would go down all the other aisles and I would look and see which item in that SKU, in that aisle, jumped out at me. Okay. So I would take it and put it in a shopping cart, and I'd go down to the next aisle and look and take it and put it in the shopping cart. Then I'd go over, after I have 3 or 4 or 5 things, I go over to the area where the product that I was working on would be. And I would take these different products and put them there and see how they look in the competitive set. Okay. And it's kind of the same thing with ideas. You know, you weigh them against each other, and the ones that stand out, you take them, whether it has anything to do with what you're working on. I've done things where I'm working on something and I do something else, and wait a minute, that's good over here. Let's take that piece and put it over here. And oh my God, that works really great. So the same thing would, especially like Nestle, worked in 5 of their 6 divisions on all kinds of products. And that really helped. I would take stuff out of the area that it would be displayed in and put it in the area that I was working in to see how well it jumped out. Because it's, you know, I'm a firm believer in letting other people with more money to spend on FSIs and stuff like that to bring you into the store. My whole philosophy is in that last 5 or 10 seconds that you're reaching for that competitive product, you're going to go like that and get mine. Let them spend the money on getting you in the store. Once you're in the store, that's where I want you. And that's what I need to take you away from the one you came into the store for. You know, it's like having a girlfriend that's got another boyfriend and just making her fall in love with you more than him. You know, it's a crazy thing, but it's always seemed to work for me. Always seemed to work. When I was working at Valvoline, I worked at Valvoline in Kentucky for probably 2 years. One of the guys that was a marketing guy at Nestle went over to Valvoline and brought us in there. And we did all these great projects for them. And, you know, doing that same thing, taking something from a food category and putting it in a motor oil category. And how does that color work? How does that shape of the bottle work? You know, we did some kick-ass stuff. You know, a lot of it was scared the hell out of them, so it was never used. You know, but I've got it. I was working for Ocean Spray at one point. This is a few years ago, and they hired me to create a bottle for them for their Ocean Spray juice, because the bottle that they were using, other people were using that same bottle. They didn't have a proprietary, you know, lock on that shape bottle, so other people were doing it. It happens all the time. So they hired me to do a bottle for them. I'll tell you, it was one of the most incredible designs I ever did. The guy that I did it for loved it. And within a week of me showing it to him, he got fired. Not because of that. Not because of that. Because it was a political thing. He was the president and CEO of a $2 billion company that's owned by growers. It's like Sunkist. Sunkist isn't private. It's privately owned by growers. It's like a co-op. Ocean Spray is the same thing. It's all cranberry growers, you know, and but that bottle, again, it's an incredible bottle that I will use somewhere. And it was uniquely their bottle. Nobody else could have used that bottle, you know, and it was really, I mean, I fall in love with a lot of stuff I do. You know, yeah. If I sound like I'm going off on a deep end.
No. Ernie, let me ask you this. On the flip side of that story, is there something where you were working against a competitor and they came out with a design and it just blew you away and they went, that it got the client bought into that and it went out and you looked at it and went, wow, I wish I had done that. Any of those?
Yeah. You know, I mean, that happened when I was doing movie posters. I did movie posters for about almost a year. And like I said, that was awful. But I actually worked for a company that just did movie posters, and that would happen a lot. You know, I mean, because you have so many people working on with the same images, the same stills, the same fonts, whatever. And yeah, there were times that people would do stuff and I go, man, that's really cool. I could see why they chose that. I wish I would have thought of that, you know, but, you know, I didn't. And I didn't let it bother me, you know, because, and in fact, when I was doing movie posters, I realized that movie posters were a whole different animal. I thought they'd be like album covers, you know, but they weren't. There was a lot more money spent on a movie than producing an album. So I would find out, like, you go to work at 7:30 in the morning. You're there with a team of half a dozen people. You're each given the stock stuff to work with, and you go away. And by noon, you have to have a minimum of 3 to 5 ideas that you've sketched out or made Xerox copies and build a little comp to show somebody. And then if you made it past that cut and yours got chose, you had to then take what you did and tighten it up and have it on the desk of the client by 4 o'clock so that the client could look at it before he's going out or she's going out the door for home. And if they picked yours, you would have to take that idea and really refine it so that it would be on that client's desk by 9 o'clock the next morning. So I found myself being there till midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, going home, eating dinner, you know, and going to bed and getting up and going through the same thing all over again. It was terrible. So what I started realizing was nothing wrong with being second or third. Okay. Nothing shabby about that. You're in the running, you know, and the good news about second or third is that you had a chance to be first. Okay. So I would start doing stuff that was less than what I wanted it to be. or what I knew it could be. So I would definitely come in second or third, always in the top three, but never chosen. So I got to go home at 6 o'clock, 5:30, and everybody else would be there. And it didn't matter. It was like a lawyer. You get paid whether they win or lose. I came in second, so I still get paid, and I got to go home and have a life. So that was a short-lived experience. My whole idea of album covers being the same as movie posters, because they get that instant recognition. When you work for corporate America, I've worked on brands, Butterfinger, Flips, all these brands that I've done stuff for, and it's like throwing a bucket of water in the ocean. And maybe you see a little piece of something that you came up with that they've taken and trashed and moved around and stretched and bent and added to it. And, and that was the payoff, as opposed to album covers that, man, you got all the, it was yours. And you go to a record store and there it is. And there's posters on the wall. And I mean, it was so, the thing that I found unpleasing about corporate America once I got into it was the fact the record business offered so much more. And working with the acts, they wanted you to be crazier than them. If you were crazy, I mean, Alice would say it all the time. I've read articles where he said we live Pacific Pioneer because they were crazier than us. And it was true. We would come to them that would scare them, with shit that would scare them. And they loved it. They scared the hell out of them, but they loved it.
Well, corporate America did well for you in all your freelance work in New York.
Yeah.
I mean, you did so much with Scholastic Books, The Garden of Eden, Jazz on Grass, New York Life,
Wearing blenders and mixers,
Omega, Ralston Purina. I mean, you're really an icon in. I mean, it's a corporate America is hard to get any kind of recognition, and I guess I was looking for more recognition, than just. And not that it was an ego thing. It's just that I was proud of what I did and I wanted it to be out there where other people saw it. Yeah. And until the internet, I never realized how many people's lives I've touched. I mean, I think I sent you guys to those top 10 sites. There's hundreds of people. One of them's got like 900. The other one's got like 800 people telling me how when I did that, it touched their life or it changed their life, or especially Jesus Christ Superstar. That one, for some reason, man, just really touched a lot of people. Yeah. And I still get it to this day, because this gold mine set, Jesus Christ Superstar, was one of the images in there. And, I've already sold 4 or 5 more things because of that. People, oh, my God, it touched my life. And my boyfriend and I were going through all this trouble. And that album came out. We went to, we got it and we listened to it together. And we just rekindled our relationship. And she was a teenager. Now she's old now, so it's like, okay. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, these symbols and all of your work just, is going to be preserved forever. And,
well, thanks to guys like you. That are doing it, and Joyce's Block Party, and Ivor with Goldmine, and now there's Jimmy. I can never pronounce Jimmy's name right, his last name, but he's a photographer and writer who writes for Hollywood Times, and he did an interview about 3 months ago with me, took some pictures and stuff, and then he reached out to me the other day and said, "Hey, that article, everybody loves it. We're going to put it out there."
Great,
and so now that's out there too, and it's really kind of, Again, I'm hoping to leverage everything for you guys, for the Block Party, for all these different entities, to let everybody get a moment in the sun.
Yeah,
it's all about having your time in the sun, man. And the trick is to keep showing up every morning. Woody Allen used to say it: showing up is 80%.
Well, let's do it. Let's show up.
Just showing up.
Let's show up.
So,
cool.
Yeah. And so I show up every morning for my moment in the sun.
Fantastic. And our next episode, it's going to be pretty exciting. This is what a lot of people like to hear about, is a lot of the album covers and how they were designed and so forth. So with that, Ernie, we want to thank you again for coming on the show, being our friend, telling, the world the history of all these things. I think some people take it for granted that these things just happen, but there's a lot that goes into them, behind the scenes.
Under the covers.
Under the covers. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's funny because to that point, there are a lot of people that love those stories. And I had one girl, she read Jimmy's story and she posted, she said, "I can't tell you how much I enjoy hearing this again and again. I've heard it so many times and I love it every time I hear it." you know, and that person will tell other people, and exponentially it'll just, and that's how, you know, that was one of my goals, is to live on beyond, you know, all of this. You know, when we do end up going to the next step, you know, and we're out of this world, I want this to still live on. And guys like you and some of these other things and articles that are written, it's putting it there forever. You know, and they always tell kids, don't put naked pictures of yourself on the internet because it'll be there forever. Well, you know, for me, this is what you guys are doing is kind of like a naked picture of me, you know, bearing my soul and telling you stuff that hopefully, you know, you enjoy hearing.
And it is great stuff. I mean, the stories, like you said, for every one story you tell us is probably 10 or 20 more.
Oh, there is.
But
yeah, because I lived it every hour of every day.
Yeah, but the world has to know it. And we want to help you preserve this forever. And
I appreciate it.
We're looking forward to the next part with you, with the album covers. And we want to thank you again for coming on and being our friend.
Yeah, thank you. Mark's a man of few words.
Well, he already said it. I was going to say it, but he already said it twice. So
yeah. See, there you go. He stole your thing. You probably told him before the show you were going to say that, and he knocked you off right there. See, I'm telling you, you got to be careful about sharing ideas, man, because
who brought
your
the cool
idea
guy?
Becomes their idea.
I'm telling you, Ernie, you see it happen every week, week in, week out. This is how it goes.
I've had clients. I've told them something, and then less than a little time later, it's their idea. You know, it's there, and you just go, okay, yeah, you know, you're right, man. That was a great idea you had. Let's do it, you know?
Ernie, did I ever tell you I had this fucking idea? I designed the Rolling Stones tongue.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
I heard tell of that. There's some people talking about you doing that.
Yeah.
You and now John Pache. Now I got to look over my shoulder. Next time it's going to be Mark. The two of you did it together.
Him and I did it, right?
I won't do that to you, Ernie. I won't. I know how it feels. I know how it feels.
We know who the real man is.
So I appreciate that. And thank you guys so much for letting me come on and do this. I mean, I'm honored. I really am.
Cool.
You know, and you guys are great to work with.